I'm Allison from Learning at the Primary Pond. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to teach you my Find the Why method that will make it so much easier for you to figure out the root cause of a student's reading difficulty. Now, why is this so important? Well, A, we know that reading is foundational to everything, but B, so many times as teachers, we end up with tons of numbers, tons of test scores, or, a test telling us that this child's fluency is poor. But the thing is there's so much more underneath. Well, why is their fluency poor? Is it that they're not decoding successfully? Is it that they're not reading quickly enough? Is it that they're not reading accurately enough? Is there a phonological awareness deficiency? There's so much underneath the surface. And it's really important to dig in because the time that we have with kids is precious. Now, whether you're a classroom teacher, a reading interventionist or specialist, or even a reading tutor, you have limited time. And if you don't know what is underlying, what is really causing and contributing to a child's reading difficulty, then you're not going to be able to use your time effectively. So that's why the Find the Why method is so useful in really pinpointing, okay, what areas is this student struggling with so that you can use your time to the max and really close the gap for that child. That's what this is all about, right? So let's go ahead and dive into my Find the Why method. And by the way, if you're interested after you watch this video in digging even deeper into Find the Why and getting assessment resources and training and support and helping kids that are struggling with reading improve, then you've got to check out the Reading Intervention Collaborative because we go so much more in depth in the collaborative, in your training videos, and you also get coaching with me and lots of support so that you can become a real expert in delivering reading intervention. All right, I'll include a link to the Reading Intervention Collaborative in the caption for this video, but now let's dive into my Find the Why method. Okay, I have slides for you, which is something a little special and different. I don't always do this on my channel. Actually, I rarely do this, but I thought that this would be the best way to visually show you what the Find the Why method is like. Now, know that everything that I am sharing is based on reading research. I didn't make up all of this, but what I did create was a special process and these forms that are in the Reading Intervention Collaborative that really walk you through this and help make it so easy and clear so that you can give kids what they need. So let's dive into what this is. Now, many times student test scores, they don't actually help us see the root causes of why a child is struggling with reading. We might see like they take some sort of standardized test and it says, oh, well, they're struggling in comprehension. But was the test actually testing comprehension or was it having them decode and then also answer comprehension questions? Because if they couldn't decode successfully, then no, they're not going to be able to comprehend because they can't read the words. Or they, it might tell us that their fluency is poor. Well, were they reading slowly? Were they reading accurately but slowly? Were they reading inaccurately but slowly? So there's a lot more to it, and we have to dig into, well, what phonics skills do they need to know? Or do they know their phonics skills? Is there a phonological awareness deficit? So there's just so much more than what test scores typically give us. The other thing about test scores is they're very helpful, but it can also be challenging to make sense of all of the numbers in your data and really see the big picture of what's going on with a student. And it's so important to see the big picture because, again, when you really understand what's going on, then you can choose instructional activities appropriately because our time is limited and we have to choose wisely. So for all of these reasons, this is why I developed the Find the Why method. The Find the Why method helps you get the right data because, yes, there is such a thing as the right and wrong data. Sometimes tests look like they're telling us one thing, but they're telling us something different. But I want to help you get the right data so that you can understand why a student is struggling and so that you know what to do about it. So how does this process work? Well, number one, we ask a series of specific questions about that student's performance in different skill areas. We ask those questions and we answer them by using simple assessments. It's not anything crazy. A classroom teacher can do this with no prior training. by gathering data, and then we use that data to answer the questions. And honestly, when you're following the Find the Why method, you will probably already have a ton of this data. It's just a matter of plugging in the right pieces into the right places. And then based upon our answers to those questions, we use that to create a striving reader profile. I'll show you what this is. I have a visual for you, but essentially the striving reader profile is showing us which areas of reading are difficult for them. And then last, we use the answers from those little questions and investigations to choose our priorities for reading intervention. And that's where it comes back to spending our time the most wisely. Okay, so let's start by looking at what we do first. So we've got a kiddo that's struggling in reading, right? And we're seeing things like maybe they have trouble learning or retaining phonics skills. Maybe they have trouble sounding out words or reading multisyllabic words, like breaking them up. That's difficult for them. They're misreading parts or leaving off parts. Let me know in the comments if you ever have kids doing this. Or maybe they're struggling with reading fluency. I know a lot of teachers see this where they're reading very slowly and they're sounding out so many words. Again, let me know in the comments if you're experiencing this with any of your students. Maybe they have trouble retelling, like they can kind of get some vague information out, but you can tell that they really didn't understand it on a deep level. Maybe they have trouble answering comprehension questions. And a child's not necessarily in a struggle with all of this. They may, but you may see some of these things in your students. When you are seeing any of these challenges, what you want to do is you want to dig in deeper into the student's word reading, like their word recognition abilities and their comprehension abilities. Because if we think about the science of reading and the simple view of reading, kids got to be able to read the words, and then we add in their comprehension, and that's what makes skilled reading. So we have to actually look at both of these areas, because sometimes what might look like a comprehension problem actually ends up being a word reading issue that we didn't even know about. So we want to investigate both of these areas, and we are going to start with some questions that we want to ask about the student's word reading, okay? So our first question is, does the student meet benchmarks? Meaning, like, if you give them a normed assessment in phonological awareness, are they where they should be? And if not, are there any specific skill areas of difficulty that they need to work on? Many struggling readers, even after, they can read and they're past kindergarten and first grade, they continue to struggle, especially with tasks like phoneme manipulation. So phoneme deletion, phoneme addition, phoneme substitution. So you want to have a good assessment that will measure all of that. You also want to ask yourself, does the student meet benchmarks in phonics? Now, nonsense word reading is a great way to assess their decoding abilities, or rather how they can use phonics to decode, because with a nonsense word, meaning a made up word, the student can't have already learned it. They can't read it and make you think that, oh yeah, they can use, the silent E rule or whatever, because if it's a nonsense word, there's no having memorized the word. They haven't seen this word before because it's made up. So that gives you a really good picture of how their phonics knowledge actually is working when they're decoding. I also have encoding listed on here, meaning their spelling. We can learn a lot about a child's reading through their spelling. These are both things that we want to work on, not to get too far ahead of myself. But so our question here is, are they meeting benchmarks using a normed assessment? Are they where they should be? And then also, based upon our results here, when we actually go and do the assessments, like in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, I have two really detailed assessments so you can see and drill down on which specific phonics skills they need to work on, because knowing that is so, so important too. Next, we want to ask, does the student meet benchmarks in fluency? So again, with a normed assessment, percentile, something like that, we want to see if they are where they are supposed to be. But we want to dig deeper. We want to see if they're not where they're supposed to be, how is their accuracy? Because when you give one of these fluency assessments, like read as many words as you can in a minute, if they miss a word, then that counts against their total number of words, right? So accuracy plays into fluency. Also, their speed. If they're reading accurately, but they're reading so slowly and sounding out many words, that's another thing we have to look at. And then there's prosody. Prosody is like expression and their phrasing, their smoothness. So even if they are reading accurately and quickly, are they having issues reading with expression? And that might not be a big deal to correct, but we want to be aware of all these things, not just say, oh, their fluency is low. We have to dig in deeper. Another thing to look at that affects fluency many times is their knowledge of high frequency words. High frequency words are those glue words that hold together sentences, like the word does, for example. You can see that in multiple sentences here. And so if they aren't able to quickly and easily read many high frequency words that are so common in text, then that's really going to slow them down overall. And we also want to know, are they reading words automatically or are they sounding out a lot? Now, these are really important investigations, questions to ask and to find out using assessments, right? And in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, I actually have assessments to give you. I show you which free normed assessments to use. And then we also look at some other things, like, for example, has the child received sufficient instruction? What is their primary language? Now, with decoding, as long as they have been taught phonics and decoding skills, they should be at least able to read words. But, sometimes word recognition can be slowed down a bit if the word isn't familiar to them in oral language. So, learning English as a second or third or fourth language, that can impact decoding to a certain degree. It tends to be more of an issue with comprehension, but we'll discuss that when we get to our comprehension investigations, because right now we're really focusing on word reading. We also need to consider if they have any other diagnoses or special needs. As we discuss in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, executive functioning skills like memory and attention can also play a role in, affecting how well a student is doing with reading. We also want to make sure that their vision and hearing get checked, because if they can't see or can't hear very well, then of course that is going to be, that's going to play a role, right? So we got to make sure that those aren't affecting things. And then there's emotional factors. Is there anxiety? Is anything going on at home? It's not to say that we want to say, oh, they're just anxious, they don't need extra help, but we need to be aware of that and sensitive to that to really gain a full picture of the child. Okay, so these are some of the main questions that I encourage teachers to ask, and I ask myself when I'm working with a child who is struggling. And again, these related to word reading. If there are any other questions that you like to ask, feel free to leave those in the comments. All right, next up, we're going to look at the other side of the coin, which is comprehension. So questions to ask ourselves. And remember, I mentioned if a child is struggling with one, you can see that they're struggling with one. You want to make sure that they're doing okay with the other, right? So especially if they're struggling with comprehension, look into the word reading questions. And even if they're struggling with word reading, you may also want to investigate their comprehension, because if they're not able to read very challenging text, then, you're not always able to tell just anecdotally. Okay, so questions here. Number one, how is the child's listening comprehension? Again, so many texts or so many tests will have the child read a text and then answer questions. But if the child can't read the text very well, then they are testing decoding. They're not testing actual comprehension. So, in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, I show you how to use this listening comprehension assessment to really find out, when we remove the decoding aspect, how are they doing with language, right? We also want to see if there's a difference between literal/factual and inferential comprehension. Literal/factual stuff is right there in the text. It's stuff that they can figure out without reading between the lines. It's very clear. Whereas with inferences, we have to draw conclusions. So for example, the one that I always say is, if the author says, a tear rolled down her cheek, we have to infer that the character is crying and the character feels sad, but the author doesn't necessarily come out and say the character is sad. That's inferential thinking. That's a basic level, but of course, as kids, they grow and the text that they read increase in difficulty level, there's even more inferential thinking required of them. Our next investigation is essentially the same, but this time we're going to test the child's reading comprehension, and we want to use a text that they can actually decode. Because again, if you're testing reading comprehension with something that they're struggling to decode, then you're not getting the full picture. And again, you want to see if there's a difference between their literal/factual and inferential comprehension. Now, there are some other pieces of the puzzle here, and often they are tested by a speech and language pathologist if a child is being assessed for a language, difficulty. We could look at syntax, how they do with grammar and syntax, and all kinds of things. But one thing that, is a little bit easier for us to assess, either as classroom teachers or reading specialists, reading interventionists, is how are the child's vocabulary skills? And again, in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, I show you how to do this, because if you don't understand the words of a text, then you're not going to understand the text. Some additional areas of consideration: prior instruction, the student's primary language. Many times we'll have a kid that can decode, but especially as the texts grow more challenging and more complex, you may have a student learning English appear to be proficient with English conversationally, but then they're really struggling with the demands of the text. So it may be a language barrier as opposed to a true comprehension difficulty. Other areas, if there's any diagnoses or special needs, again, executive functioning skills can interfere with comprehension, or struggles in executive functioning skills can interfere with comprehension. Their vision and hearing, want to make sure those are okay. And then, emotional factors as well. And actually, if a child is having trouble, relating to others and understanding emotions, then that is actually something that's going to play into their ability to make inferences and understand human characters and feelings and things like that in texts. So there's a lot to consider here. These are some highlights. All right, so we ask ourselves those questions, we use data to answer them, and then based upon that data, I show you how to not diagnose a reader, but to figure out, big picture, is the child just struggling, for example, with phonics? Maybe they were okay except for nonsense word reading. Maybe they just need some more phonics instruction, or maybe they simply haven't had enough text reading practice, even though phonics and phonological awareness is fine. Maybe they just need to build fluency through repetition. So sometimes it will turn out that it's just one specific instructional area of weakness, but sometimes there is something else going on. And so what that something else could be a specific word reading difficulty. This can be called different things, but it can also be abbreviated as SWRD. This is when a child is struggling with reading words, as you might imagine. And the reason I have this as a tree representing this reader is because in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, we talk a lot about how there are roots and these underlying factors and underlying causes, and the roots affect how many leaves, so to speak, there are on the reading tree. And you can see that this is not like a full tree, right? It could have many more leaves, many more branches. It's a striving reader. And so what we see externally, because we can't see the roots of a tree, but what we see externally are from our investigations, we're going to see that they have below average word recognition. They have poor fluency. They have average or better oral language and vocabulary skill, and they have good comprehension, unless they're reading something that they can't decode very well, and then it could interfere. So that's what we see with this profile. Word reading is difficult, but comprehension and language skills are fine. This is often what we see with kids with dyslexia. Our next little reader profile is a specific reading comprehension difficulty, SRCD. And with these readers, we see poor comprehension of text. We see average or better word recognition skills, meaning they're reading the words fine. And their fluency is fine unless comprehension interferes. So sometimes comprehension actually impacts how expressive a reader is or how they're phrasing words together. So fluency aids comprehension, but comprehension also aids fluency, which is why I have that note about, well, fluency is fine, but if comprehension interferes, then you may have some issues. And then our last little tree is our mixed reading difficulty tree. And these kiddos actually have trouble reading words and comprehending text. So they have below average word recognition, poor fluency, at least one area of weakness in oral language, just language as a whole, and then weak comprehension, both listening and reading. So same thing goes for the specific reading comprehension difficulty. You're going to see that their listening comprehension is low and their reading comprehension is low. Now, again, not every reader that's having trouble is going to fit one of these profiles necessarily, right? Sometimes there's just an instructional gap. They haven't received sufficient instruction. But in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, I show you how to sort that out and figure out what to focus on. All right, our last little piece here is how to choose priorities based upon what a student is struggling with. So first, we're going to start with kids that have word reading difficulties. These kiddos are going to need intervention on phonological awareness, phonics and decoding, like even strategies, decoding multisyllabic words, high frequency words. You want to build their sight word bank so that they can read more words automatically and instantly. You want to work on fluency, specifically focusing on their accuracy and building their speed, their rate. And then if we want to think about kids who have comprehension difficulties, we need to work with them on language comprehension. That could be listening and reading. Of course, we want them to be able to read text and understand it, but some of it might have to be listening as we build skills for them. We want to teach them simple strategies that are easy to apply to help aid them with comprehension. We want to work on things like inferring, self-monitoring, comprehension, so noticing if they don't get it and fixing it, doing things to better understand. We also want to work with them on sentence level comprehension and syntax, grammar, all of that good stuff. Comprehension difficulties can also manifest themselves in difficulties with written expression, writing. And then we also want to build their knowledge of text structures, their background knowledge. And these are a lot of bullet points, right? So in the Reading Intervention Collaborative, I actually show you how to drill down even further and really pick, based upon a child's needs, what you most want to focus on, because this is a lot for intervention, and these are all important things to teach. And you'll teach like writing and other things too in your core. But when it comes to reading intervention, we have to just choose a few areas. And so again, in the RIC, I show you how to do that. And for those little ones with mixed reading difficulties, we do want to look at all of these areas. But again, we can, focus in and choose just a few for our intervention because, of course, time is always limited. All right, so way to go. We made it all the way through the video. Let me just recap quickly for you how Find the Why works. You ask a series of specific questions, which I shared for you, the ones for word reading and comprehension. I also have them for kids struggling with letter names and letter sounds in the Reading Intervention Collaborative. We use simple assessments / gather data that we already have to answer those questions. We use the answers to create a striving reader profile or see what might fit. And then we also use that information to choose and set our priorities for reading intervention activities, which is a whole other thing, but we cover that in the Reading Intervention Collaborative as well. Okay, so as I mentioned, I have forms that make all of this easy. It is all broken down for you inside the Reading Intervention Collaborative. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely check out the link in the caption. It is just so much easier to figure out what's going on with a child and what you should be doing with them when you have the right tools, when you know what assessments are really effective, and when you have the resources to be able to give them the instruction that they need. So would love to have you check out the RIC. Okay, I hope that was helpful to see and helpful to you in learning how to pinpoint a child's specific area or areas of weakness so that you can help them close the gap. This is all about making the most of our time so that we can get kids reading on grade level, even enjoying reading so that they can be successful in school and beyond. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the Reading Intervention Collaborative. There's a link in the caption. Before you leave, hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and I will see you in my next video.